This is a learning module about the basics of using Finale notation software. Finale is helpful for notating original compositions as well as transcribing and editing music. It can also be used to make custom worksheets or exercises for students. This tutorial will cover the basic tools available and how to input music. So when we open Finale, and I'm using Finale 2014.5, the newer versions are very similar, so this information should still apply. When I open it up, I'm going to click on the Setup Wizard. Setup Wizard is pretty easy to follow, so I recommend using it anytime you open up Finale, just because within the wizard you still have the opportunity to change all the settings that you need to, but it kind of guides you through it. So the first thing we're going to do is choose our ensemble. It gives you some presets such as a SATV choir with piano, a jazz band, concert bands, small ensembles, orchestras. You can also create a new ensemble, which is what we're going to do today, so we can see how that works. So I'll click Next. When you're creating your ensemble, you need to choose what instruments you want. So it groups them by families: keyboards, voices, woodwinds, brass, all the way down to percussion, which is a pretty comprehensive list. We're going to choose woodwinds. You can choose your instrument by clicking on it and saying Add, or just by double clicking on it. So we'll choose 3 instruments. If you want to save this as a new ensemble because it's something you'll use a lot, you can do that as well. And we'll say Next. Next page is our score information, so you have your title. If there's a subtitle, you can embed that. Composer. If you have an arranger or a lyricist, as well as copyright information, all that can go in as well. And we have score settings. This is where we can choose our time signature, our key signature, how many measures we want initially. We can tell an initial tempo, so how fast it's going to go, as well as if we need a pickup measure. So we're going to start concert B flat. I'm going to leave, we'll say initial tempo. All the other settings can be the same. And we'll say Finish, and it'll generate a blank score for us. So here we have our score. We can see our title, composer. The grayed out parts are there in case you want to add them. It's not going to show up on your printing. We see our initial tempo, and then we see our 3 starting instruments. Before we input music, we're going to go over some of the tools that you can use so you know where everything is. So we'll start up here. The file menu is pretty much what a file menu always is. We have the Save, we have New, Export, and Print. Under Edit, you have your basic undo, redo, copy, paste. We also have down here add measures, so if you're going along and realize you need more space for your music, you just choose add, type in how many you want, and it adds it to the end. Under utilities, we have transpose. It's grayed out right now because I don't have any notes in, but if you had a note and then you realized you needed to transpose it up a step, like the melody was too low, or you needed everything to go up a fifth, you can select what you want to transpose, click transpose, and then tell it how much to move it by. We also have the option to adjust spacing, fit measures, so if you want 4 measures in every line, check notation for like silly things like you left out a rest, and stem direction if you need to adjust that. Under View, right now we're in Page View, which means it looks just like a normal piece of music. In Scroll View, it pulls it across so it's a single set, and then you can scroll through the music that way. I also have the option to zoom if you want to create a bookmark so it's easy to find certain sections. One really helpful feature of the View menu is out of range notes. So instruments have certain notes they can play and not play based on how the instrument's built. Some of that is also related to how advanced the musician is. So if you're writing music and you're not sure how high or low an instrument can play, you can turn this feature on. And based on whether or not you say it's a beginner, intermediate, or advanced player, it can tell if you put in a note that the instrument or the player won't be able to do. So that's incredibly helpful. We're going to switch back to Page View. Under Document, right now we're editing in the score, meaning I can see all 3 parts at the same time. I also have the option to edit each part individually, so I could look at just the clarinet part. And then I can go back to the score. We also have options to format if you want the page to be a different size. For example, if you're printing on legal paper. Displaying concert pitch right now, and what it defaults to is to show you the parts not in concert pitch as transposing instruments. So notice the key signature for the clarinet is different because it has to transpose. If that's a scale that you're not as comfortable with, you can tell it to display in concert pitch, and then you can input all your music as if it was a piano part, and then when you're done you just switch it back, and it kind of does all that transposing for you. MIDI audio, a lot of these are more advanced settings. You have the opportunity to change some of the human playback settings. You can also change, like if it's playing through VST, which is a virtual set of instruments, or through MIDI. We won't be doing anything with that today because that's all more advanced. Tools is just a menu of all your tools, which we're going to go over next. So looking at the tools, first one up here is just a selection tool. So just, you know, drag and choose what you want like normal programs. The staff tool allows you to change the staff attributes, so I can change the name. I can change what things appear, so if I don't want it to show rests for whatever reason, I could take that out. If I don't want to show stems, I can take that out. You can also change, like, you can use alternate notation. You can change the full staff name, which right now says flute, as well as the abbreviated staff name, so if you need to adjust that, you can. Key signature. A lot of the settings, or all the settings you put in when you created the music, can be changed. So we said the key signature was going to be B flat. If I decided I instead wanted to be E flat, I can click at the beginning and change it for the whole piece. I can also change partway through just by clicking the measure I want, changing the key signature. If you've already put in music, it gives you the option to transpose or hold the notes to their original pitches, or hold the notes to the staffs or modally. We'll cancel so that we don't put that in. Same thing with the time signature. I can click where I want to change. I can say how many beats per measure, as well as what type of note gets one beat. Clef tool. Sometimes instruments go into a high enough range or low enough range that you may want to switch clefs, like the bassoon sometimes plays in the tenor clef, so I can change that when I need it. And then the measure tool gives me the opportunity to change the attributes for the measure. So if you need a double bar line, or maybe you want a dash line or something invisible, depending on the exercises you're writing, you can change all that. The next couple ones we're going to skip. They have to do with hyperscribe and some of the more advanced things, so we'll just kind of jump over those. Then we have some expression tools. So the first one is Smart Shape. Smart Shape is like your slurs, your crescendos, trills. It has some brackets, so if you're marking a trill, I need to show where it stops. The articulation tool allows me to put in articulations on the notes, like an accent, a staccato. The expression tool is stuff like dynamic changes, the initial dynamic, tempo alterations, as well as technique things. And once we put in some music, we'll use all of those. The rest of these tools are more advanced, like there's a chord tool, there's lyrics, there's text, resizing, so if you need to cue notes, you can resize those. All of those we're just going to kind of ignore because this is a very basic tutorial. But you can look up online what those do if you're interested in using them. Finale has a pretty good online tutorial. If you just Google the question, their help site is really good about explaining everything. So the next thing we're going to look at is how to actually input your music. And that's going to use these tools along the left-hand side on my panel. It may for you be along the top here, depending on where it just defaults to. So the first one's the eraser. That one's pretty obvious. The next one's the repitch tool, and we'll explain that in a second, but it looks like a whole note with arrows. The next chunk is all your rhythmic values. So we have a double whole note all the way down to a 128th note. So those are the rhythmic values you can use, plus dots and ties, as well as their corresponding rests. Underneath the 128th note is the dot, followed by your accidentals. We also have ties, we have triplets, and then grace notes. These down here at the bottom we probably won't use because they're more advanced, but up here you'll use a lot. To input music, you have a couple options. The first one is to just click every note in. So we're going to start with some quarter notes, and I just click the quarter note. I come over here to the staff, decide where I want to go, and click it in. This one is one of the more cumbersome methods, in my opinion, because you have to line it up. If you zoom in more, it's a little bit easier to find the right one. But sometimes if you get comfortable using the keyboard shortcuts, those can be a lot easier. The keyboard shortcuts are helpful because you have two options. You can use the letter names. So if the next note I need is a G, I just press G, and there it is. If I need a half note, I can click the half note and then tell it the letter name. I can also use the arrows. So if the next note I need is an E flat, I can just down arrow, hit enter, down arrow. So a combination of arrows and the enter key to type those in. I tend to use those options the most just because they're a little bit faster, but all those ways work. If you make a mistake, like here on the clarinet part, I put in 2 C's and then realized I needed an 8th note, you can either erase it and put in what you need, or you can just click the new rhythm and click on that and it changes it for me. If I put the wrong pitch in, like I didn't want an A, I wanted a G, I can use the repitch tool. And just like the rhythm correction, I just click where I want the new note to be and it fixes it. I can also erase it and click the new one in, or I can use the keyboard shortcuts. Okay, let's finish putting in the clarinet part. Okay, and then we'll end with the bassoon part. As you're entering music, this would be a spot where maybe you want to use the transpose show and concert pitch feature. I'm doing those in my head. If that's not something you're comfortable with, then you could tell it to display in concert pitch. It shows it like a piano part. You put in all the notes and then switch it back and it does the transposing for you. I want a quarter note, 2 8th notes, a quarter note again, and with the half notes. Okay, so now I have music in all the parts. When I'm ready to listen to it, up here in my play settings, you have just normal, go back to the beginning, rewind, play, pause, and so on. It tells you where you're currently located, so what measure, what beat. If you have a repeat, it tells you how many times through, so first time, second time. I can also see my tempo here. A setting I'd recommend changing, if you click on the playback settings, normally when you open a file, it defaults to always start at measure 1. If you have a long piece or you're going to be spot checking a lot, I recommend changing it to current counter settings so I can tell it exactly what measure to start on. So right now we're going to start on measure 1, hit play. Now if I thought I heard something that I wanted to hear again, for example, maybe there was a mistake in measure 2, I can tell it to go to measure 2, hit play. No, measure 2 was good. So I can hear just that isolated spot. Just because I'm not going to add anything to the other parts, I'm going to delete these measures using my selection tool, and then I can hit backspace and they're gone. I could also erase all of them if I wanted to. Now that I have music in, I can add some additional features. So the Smart Shape tool, we can add slurs. So I could say this is all slurred, and I do that by double clicking the first note and then dragging to the last note of the slur, and now I have a slur marking in. I can put in a crescendo, so if I wanted them to start quiet and get louder. Unfortunately, with the Smart Shape tool, you do have to enter them for every staff. A lot of the other expression tools, you can just choose all the staffs, it stays at the same time. So for example, if I wanted to put in an articulation, for example, make these 8th notes staccato, I can just drag and select them, choose the articulation, this first one staccato. I can also do it across, so I could go like that and choose all of them. Same is true on dynamics, so if I wanted them all to start really quietly, I could select them that way. Now before I choose my ending dynamic, just a couple things in this expression menu because we didn't look at it earlier. I can choose dynamics. I can also choose tempo marks, tempo alterations, so if you need it like to speed up, expressive text such as dolce, play sweetly, marcato, cambrio, technique text, so if you need them to use a mute, you need it to be pizzicato, you want to give notations like left hand, right hand, you can put all those in. You also have rehearsal markings, and then miscellaneous. You can also add your own, so if there's something you needed, like an expression text that's not there, you can create it, and then it'll be in the menu. Going back to dynamics, we're going to have them finish fortissimo. Now when I listen to it, if I reset to the beginning, Okay, now I can hear those things I put in. One of the cool things about Finale is it has a human playback feature, and a lot of that was in this MIDI/audio menu that we kind of ignored earlier. Right now it says play through VST, which is like a virtual instrument program. Play through MIDI. You can change the human playback, so right now it's standard. I could tell it to be classical or funk or jazz or samba. So you have a lot of customization options in terms of how it plays back, but the fact that it can like make those dynamic changes and articulations is pretty cool. If there's something you wanted to hear specifically in a part, I can press Control K and open up a score manager. So right now I can see all the parts, and I can even choose specifically, like right now it's on clarinet player 1. There are actually 3 different clarinet sounds, 4 if you count the solo sound. So you have a couple different options there, but the big one is right here, M for mute and S for solo. So if I wanted to hear just the clarinet part to make sure I didn't make any mistakes, I can choose solo, hit the X. Now when I play it, all I hear is the clarinet part. That's really helpful when you're inputting parts for your students for error detection, because sometimes, especially if there's a lot of parts going on, you miss things that in class you won't miss because maybe the student is sitting right in front of you, so it's easier to hear them. So when you isolate parts, you can kind of find those errors easier. To undo that, I'll press Control K again, get rid of the solo. Now I'm good to go. In the same menu, I can update my file information. So if I made any changes there, I can also add instruments. So if I decided I needed a 4th one, I can say add. I can choose it. It'll add it to my list, and it'll show up in my score. And then I can, add a 4th part. Just a few more things before we wrap up this tutorial. Over here on the left, we have a few more rhythm options. So if I wanted to keep writing music, but I wanted to use some dotted notes or some accidentals, I have a few options. I can click the note I want, the rhythm value, and then choose the dot. And now when I put in, it is dotted. I can also enter just a normal half note and then press the period for a dot. Accidentals work the same way. So I can choose half note and then choose the sharp, the flat, or the natural. I can also put in a half note and then press the minus sign for a flat, sharp sign for natural, or N, or sharp sign, plus sign for sharp, and then N for natural. Ties are the same way. The cheat for ties is a T, or use the tie button over here. And then rests are R. So if I wanted a half note before this next one, I could click it, type R. If I later decide I want it to be a real note, I just go back to it, press R again, and there it is. So those are kind of all the basics of inputting your music into Finale. Once you think you're ready to go, I recommend going to Document and looking at individual parts. Sometimes Finale does weird things, like this piano should actually be over here, so I just want to drag it over so it looks better. Once you've checked all the parts, you're good to go. Under File, you can save, print. You have export options, so you can tell it to export as an audio file, previous versions of Finale, MIDI files, music XML, PDF, and then Smart Music, which is a huge one. They added this a couple years ago. So if you use Smart Music in your schools and there's something you want your students to practice with that program, you can export it directly into it, assign it to them, and then they can practice it at home. That's really helpful with custom exercises and things that maybe aren't already in the Smart Music library you want them to have. So that's basically it for the Smart Music tutorial. Hopefully you feel more comfortable using the program. It's a great resource in your classroom. If you do have further questions or you want to use some of these more advanced tools that we skipped, I recommend going to Finale's website and looking at their user manual. It's incredibly helpful. It's got screenshots of everything. It also has practice exercises that can help walk you through some of those skills that we didn't address today.